We are talking to leaders about leadership and specifically about leadership challenges. It's a privilege and honor to have my friend, Dr. Joshua Opadiya with me today. Joshua is the senior pastor of Every Nation Church in Sydney, Australia, originally from Nigeria, earned a PhD in Innsbruck, Austria, PhD in environmental science, and he's been a university professor turned church planter, pastor, preacher, disciple maker. Joshua, welcome. Glad to have you here, my friend.
Thank you so much, Pastor Steve. It's an honor and privilege to be here. It's good to be here with you.
It's kind of odd to talk to you about leadership challenges. I've described you as the happiest pastor in all of Every Nation. Why is that? What is this joy you always seem to have?
Well, I think just always keeping God as the focus, the calling, the dream, the vision that God is placed in our heart to bring the gospel to the lost. So to see lives transformed, people's lives change, that gives us the joy.
Joshua, when we talk about challenges, as a pastor, a cross-cultural church planter from another nation to Australia, a very unchurched nation, what is the biggest challenge you have faced as a leader?
Leading change. That's been a challenge, moving from event-based to discipleship culture.
Yeah.
And then we've also faced, the challenge of ministering in a different culture. We are from Nigeria, and we're ministering in Australia.
So Australia is different than Nigeria.
Absolutely. It's a Western culture. We've also faced the challenge of persecution, especially in Australia, where there was one time we found ourselves in the newspaper. Somebody who was not happy with what was happening in the church went to the news and started to talk a lot of things that were not true about us. So that was a challenge, but we saw God's hand, move mightily, and we're still there, advancing the kingdom, making disciples.
So you talked about leading change, changing the culture and maybe the outreach mechanism of the church. You talked about persecution. What would you say to younger leaders who are facing either some change leadership, change management, or persecution?
Number one is that if you're facing leading change, for example, for us, it was very important that we do not waver in what we believe is what God is called the church to be. So being persistent on it, bringing clarity to it also was very important, and making sure that we can get other people who have experienced a similar thing in discipleship and everything to come and train and enlighten us, just to encourage the church. For persecution, I think for me, one thing that has really stood out is I'm always going back to the call of God upon my life.
Yeah.
And I know there will be persecution. I mean, we're in Australia.
Yeah.
What persecution? Other nations, they face a lot of very difficult situations. And for us, it's more like, our music is too loud. We are praying in a different language. That's not persecution as I see it. It's really something of a joy that people notice us and they say, wow, these people are doing exactly what, we've been called to do. So I would just encourage them to keep the focus of their calling and not to waver, and really just get people around them that can encourage them.
I think about you and your family going from Nigeria to Austria in Europe, up in the mountains, beautiful mountains, and then from there to Australia, which is another change. What would you say to younger leaders who are going into cross-cultural missions?
For us, it was very important that we're upfront, we're clear about what we're there in Australia to do. It's very easy when you are from a culture and people from your culture are living in that place, they kind of gravitate towards you. Yeah. So we're very clear from the onset, we are not a Nigerian church. We're not an African church. We are an Australian church. We're here to reach the nation. If you want a Nigerian church or African church, maybe you go back to Nigeria and you reach there. We keep saying we're a multicultural, a multi-generational church. Our focus is to reach this nation and raise leaders in this nation. So I think it's important to make it clear from the beginning. By default, one way or the other, I relate with more Australians than I do with Nigerians, because I know where I'm getting to. Make friends and understand, the culture of the place where they're planning the church.
I remember visiting your church a number of years ago, and wow, I was so floored by the sense of the presence of God. Yeah. And I pray that more people from your nation would hear the call of God to take what God's doing in Nigeria and take it to the ends of the earth.
Amen.
So Joshua, thank you. Appreciate all that you're doing.
Thank you.
I don't know where you're called to. I don't know where you are right now listening to this, but we are Every Nation. God has called us to every nation. God's called us from every nation. And I am praying that God will send workers from every nation to every nation to reap the harvest.